we talk about sensory processing a lot, and then sensory processing disorder and sensory processing, and then many school teachers have, especially special education teachers, talk about children with the sensory processing issues. And then we say just a sensory friendly environment, and teachers are encouraged to make a sensory friendly environment. It's just a sensory. So what is really exactly sensory processing means? I use the term sensory pathway instead of a processing. It's the same, just meanings. However, when we say sensory processing, we feel like this is occupational therapist territory, their specialties, their disciplines. So any child has a sensory processing disorder or sensory issues, then many special education teachers or general education teachers, they just do hands off. Then they believe this is not about the teaching. This is about the occupational therapist work. However, this sensory pathway is very, very important functions, foundation functions for human learning process. So as I said, I emphasized this so much about this sensory processing. And then let's say the sensory processing or sensory pathways, I use Miller's, and I believe she had many publications, and I would say 2005 or 15, I forgot the exact year. That has her model is just 3 categories in sensory processing models. And one category is just sensory modulation. So she says sensory modulation disorder could have oversensitivity, undersensitivity, or craving sensitivity. So that's a sensory modulation disorders. And then second category is a sensory-based motor disorders. And then third category is a sensory discrimination. So that's a Miller's model. And then to me, there are, about 3, different, occupational therapists. They put out the models, like we have done DUNN, and she has a sensory profile, screening, evaluation, I don't know how to call that, evaluation instrument by Pearson publication. And we have another person, I forgot the name, and she has, her different models, and then she used the threshold, instead of use sensitivity, and she used, threshold. And so different occupational therapists, they have models, but Miller was the first one used these 3 categories, especially sensory-based model. I really like, see that was eye-opening for me, because sensory-based model really gave me how diagnostic education should be. So I could develop diagnostic curriculum, curriculums for diagnostic education, so remediation. So I see the cognitive deficit could be remediated, and then the beginning part was sensory-based motor functions, because motor functions and brain development are tied. It's correlated, interrelated, directly related. So motor functions and brain functions are pretty much together. So it's a slow, and brain development is slow, and then motor is fast and development. Because brain function, again, it's not visible. It's not active. However, human mobility is very active, right? So the more you develop your motor mobilities and sharp mobilities, smart mobilities, that much brain moves, develops, brain function developed, and becomes smaller, smaller and smaller. So that's, Norman's theory and physical therapy. And not surgeons, but neurologically, motor functions and brain development are very, tightly related. So anyway, sensory modulation is oversensitivity, undersensitivity, and craving sensitivity. So oversensitivity means, you're overly sensitive. So this is different from craving sensitivity. Craving sensitivity is like ADHD. They crave, they seek stimulation. However, oversensitivity is you're very sensitive. Let's say you ate a spicy food. If your tongue never touched the spicy food and then you ate spicy food and then your tongue was really sensitive, you cry and you maybe just feel, you couldn't breathe. That much shock you have, that's oversensitivity. And then you have a very sour, extremely sour lemonade. It's very, your tongue is sensitive and it's oversensitivity. Any loud sound, it really bothers your nerves, so that's oversensitivity. And then very strong sun, it hurts your eyes, it's oversensitivity. However, we know we have experiences. So when our eyes are hurt, we know the sun is too bright, too strong, and then we have sunglasses. So we have those management. And then when we hear those vacuum sound or just outside lawnmowers, I feel it's just like loud. And then we have some, earbud or something, and or just, avoid that place. So we know how to manage our oversensitivity. However, some children, especially children, they are not independent yet. They are dependent, right? So adults don't do any, they could not do any. So especially children have a little bit low cognitive deficits and something, and then never experience those, and they don't know how to handle those oversensitivity, and they scream and yell and just show tantrum and self-harms and feel it, exhaustive, difficult behaviors they show when they have those oversensitivity. And then pretty much right now, currently, our, adults' reaction or response to their oversensitivity, we try to protect them. So we try to accommodate environmental factors to just stimulate them too much, and then try to moderate, those settings. So instead of having them gradually, slowly experience those. So even though you don't appreciate and you don't like, however, you understand what's going on, and you can just stand and bear those moments. Instead of we train that, and most of adult response is a sensory processing disorders are very permanent impairment, and we are afraid to do any. Instead of just teaching educationally, we shape and remediate those sensitivity, we just try to protect. So more like we just work on more nurture than education. And under sensitivity is the opposite. That is a sensory inputs coming in and attention is not activated. So you don't feel and sense new, sensory stimuli. So that's under sensitivity. It is critically impact the children's learning. And that's the communication, with the outer world, because the outer world information comes in, and then you just process and you respond, right? So it's more like a reciprocal interaction. So that is a learning about the world, and then you see the others' gestures, others laughing, others' facial expressions, and language, and social and emotion. You imitate and copy and learn from it. Later on, even identification, your internal characteristics, so you even try to identify and copy and imitate. So that's how children's learning goes, and that's how social skills develops, and emotional part and all those. But under sensitivity, you don't have those senses, and then not sharply just receive those senses, sensory information. So it directly impact children's learning. So under sensitivity is directly. So oversensitivity, under sensitivity, both are related to impact children's learning. It really slow their learning and delay their learning. However, under sensitivity is a more severe case. And craving sensitivity is like you could see ADHDs, and many adults do opposite because they believe ADHD is, they interpret as oversensitivity, and then they try to send them to the calm area. They actually seek more stimuli and more just strong stimulation. However, teachers put them in a quiet room, make them more crazy to seek. And so that is the opposite, response. And then sensory-based motor is like a dyspraxia and postural disorder. These are, as I said, it's not orthopedic impairment, and they're physically fine, all limbs are fine, and they have a body, parts are all that they could function. Just their senses are dull. So it's like, they easily tipped, easily fall, easily get hurt, and a lot of physical accident happens because of their senses. That's why we call it sensory-based motor functions. Okay, as I said, this one could be a key of our children's cognitive deficit remediation. And then sensory discrimination is like your sensory information you discriminate means you sort out. So you see, and then you can name those. That's a sensory discrimination. So we have a visual discrimination, auditory discrimination, and then taste, smell, and then vestibular and proprioceptive, and then tactile and interoceptive. So interoceptive, internal, feelings like thirsty and hungry and those feelings, and then you feel just, pee and you poop, and just those feelings is interoceptive feelings, and it's hard for children, and they even hard to differentiate in a stomach ache and hunger feelings. So when they feel hungry, they feel like my stomach is hurt. So that's the senses how children sort out and discriminate, and then they can name it. Okay, so these are the sensory pathways and sensory whole structure of a sensory system. Okay.